All right, thank you all for just joining us. If you have just joining, just let into the room. If you wouldn't mind, everyone just go ahead and mute. I am going to say it at least 17 more times, just so everyone here knows. Go ahead and mute yourself so we can limit any cross noise. We can unmute ourselves and ask questions towards the end. We're just about ready to go here. Actually, I think 7:04, I think we can begin. So welcome everyone to our second event of our year, to Herringut Coastal Science Center's February Learn, Discover, Grow event. My name is Patrick Burnham. I'm the Educational Programs Coordinator at the center, and we are so excited to have you all join us tonight. Herringut Coastal Science Center's mission is to educate students and communities about the connections between the ocean, inland waters, and the economy of Maine. Our work spans a history of 21 plus years engaging with students, educators, community members, and organizations to spark a sense of wonder and place for the natural world and those who gain a livelihood from it. I wish to note tonight, before we begin, that the Herringut Coastal Science Center is a nonprofit organization, as is the Friends of Maine Coastal Islands, and is supported by donations and gifts from our participants. Through your generosity, we are able to provide programs that engage students and communities to think about our connections to the natural world. Our hope for this Learn, Discover, Grow virtual event is that you will learn something new and share it with the people in your life. If you find tonight's event informative, we would greatly appreciate your donation. You can find a donation link on our website, as well as the chat at the end of the presentation. We love to offer these virtual events in this collaborative Zoom style, rather than just a seminar view. Because of this, we do ask to make sure that everyone is on mute to reduce any competing voices or noises with our speaker. At the end of the presentation, there will be some time to ask questions, and you can unmute then. You can also type in any questions into the chat box, and I will compile them. And if they're relevant, I'll bring them up to our speaker, or we'll save them to the end and ask them then. Now, because our time in this event tonight is spent talking about our amazing natural resources that Maine has to offer us, I want to continue with an acknowledgement honoring all of the Indigenous peoples. We wish to acknowledge the spiritual and physical connection the Abenaki and the Wabanaki people have maintained to the Aki, which is land, and Nebi, which is water. Herringut Coastal Science Center and our work exists within this Aki land and Nebi water of this unceded territory of the Wabanaki homeland. It is our responsibility to foster relationships and opportunities that strengthen the well-being of the Indigenous people who carry forward the traditions of their ancestors. So with all of that, I am now super excited and happy to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Tori Tibbetts. She is an interpretive guide from the Friends of Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge. Woohoo! Tori is a lifelong Mainer, passionate about both marine and terrestrial conservation. Tori spent 6 months living in Australia, learning various conservation strategies for different ecosystems. With a BS in environmental studies and a BA in marine affairs from the University of New England, go Nor'easters, in Biddeford, Maine, Tori is starting her career as an environmental education and outreach. Tori enjoys hiking, softball, reading, and playing with her dogs. So please, everyone, give your attention to Tori tonight. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'll get my PowerPoint up here. All right. How are we looking there? Okay. No one's jumping up and down. I'll take that as a good sign.
Looks great from here.
All right. So like Patrick said, I'm Tori Tibbetts. I'm here from the Friends of Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge, and we're going to talk about seabird conservation and research in the Gulf of Maine. Before we get started, I do have to say a big thank you to Linda Welch. She is our head biologist at the Refuge, and she put together this amazing presentation and keeps it nice and up to date every year with all of the new information that we learn every season. All right, so if you're not familiar with the Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge, you're probably wondering what it is about now. So the refuge is a complex of 72 islands, and it spans pretty much the entirety of the Maine coast. The 72 islands account for roughly 4,000 acres worth of land. And then we also have 4 mainland divisions, which account for roughly 4,298 acres of land. We also protect 1,800 acres of intertidal habitat and 75 miles of shoreline. So that's a lot of land we're talking about, lots of different kinds of ecosystems. And then here's a really good visual to kind of help you picture just how broad of a scale we're talking about. When we say the whole coast, we mean the whole coast, right from the border with Canada all the way down to the border with New Hampshire. We're taking care of a lot of islands. All right, so we have all these islands. What do we do with them? We participate in a number of different management strategies. One of them is predator control. We're out there, watching for predators. We also do some habitat management, some social attraction methods, and then we also have seasonal technicians who are out on the islands during the nesting season. And what they're doing while they're out there is they're adding to long-term data sets on colony size, reproductive parameters, feeding rates, diet composition, survival, and recruitment rates. So lots of different things they're looking into out there. Now, of course, we have 72 islands in our complex, which is a lot and would require a lot of people if we manned all of them. So the way that we divide and conquer that is we take the islands that have significant seabird populations on them, and we man specifically those islands. So all the red dots that you can see there, those are islands that the Maine Coastal Islands staffs, they send out technicians to those islands. And then towards southern Maine, you'll notice we've got some blue dots. Those islands are partner islands where things like Project Puffin, the Audubon Society, and other local organizations, they're responsible for staffing those islands and kind of making sure everything is running smoothly down there. So we do share some knowledge and we talk back and forth, but we're not as involved in the day-to-day ongoings on those islands as we are on the red dots. And then if you have your Zoom set up like me, you might only barely be able to see it, but there is a yellow dot towards the border with Canada on Machias Seal Island. And this island is a contested island. If you ask Canada, Canada says they own it. And of course, if you ask us, we say we own it. So we kind of cut the difference and we work in partnership with Canada to make sure that the seabirds out there are well taken care of. All right, so habitat management. What do we mean when we talk about habitat management of these islands? So there's a number of different things that we do to try and make these islands as hospitable as possible and just inviting for these seabirds to come in. And one of those things, we do some prescribed fire burns. So we burn Petit Manan Island every season. The seabirds really prefer some short, like just barely coming in vegetation. So what we'll do is we'll go out right before they arrive, give it a nice burn. And then as that new growth is coming up, it's right when the seabirds are arriving and they're super happy about it. So they get a nice place to go and we're ready for the season. And then we have some sheep that live out on Matinic Island, and they are allowed into the section of the island that is owned by the refuge seasonally so that they can graze and help keep control of the plant life in the refuge in a nice, green, super sustainable way. It makes for a very interesting time when our technicians get out there. That's one of the first things they have to do is go around and round up all the sheep and get them back over to their own side of the island. So a very fun first week for them. And then any areas where we can't do prescribed burns or islands that don't have sheep on them, we do some mowing to try and, again, just keep the grass levels at a height that the birds will be happy with and not be too annoyed with us when they show up back to their summer homes and they're not looking too great. We also control some deposition of sand and gravel. So our little terns that are out there really like to nest in rocky areas. As you can imagine, the coastline of Maine, the shorelines are really rocky. So sometimes we get terns that decide they want to set up shop right on the shoreline. And that's not the best place for them to be because we get a strong storm or an extra high tide and potentially they can lose their nests. So we try and create some areas a little bit further inland so that they'll come nest there instead so that they have a better chance of surviving any strong storms or high tides. We also do some invasive plant and pest control. This is mostly just for the benefit of the island technicians that are out there. We want them to be safe and comfortable. And as you can see that lower left picture there, the brown-tailed moth, anyone here who's ever had one of those rashes knows that it's not fun and it wouldn't be comfortable if you were stuck on an island and couldn't, go to CVS and pick up some lotion for it. So we try and combat that and keep it as comfortable as we can out there for them. So we've got the island all ready for the birds. Now, how do we get them to come to the island and stay there? So we use this form of social attraction, which includes putting out some decoy birds to lure birds into the island. So it's pretty well documented now. We know that seabirds really prefer to nest with other seabirds. They like to see each other around and they like to know that this place is safe and we can successfully live here. So we'll put out these decoys in areas where seabirds would naturally occur. And it really does help draw them in. As you can see with this puffin here hanging out with the razorbill decoy, they do really gravitate towards the decoys and they take some really good interest in them. They do try to kind of get them to interact with them for a little bit until they realize, yeah, this guy's not responding to me, and then they move on. But they do put a good amount of effort into trying to get a reaction out of our decoy friends. And then here's a good picture of a tern decoy. You can see that rocky substrate we were talking about that they prefer to nest in. So again, we're getting them in areas where it would make sense to see a tern there, and another tern would see that and go, yeah, makes sense. And then of course, we've got the tern on the right who has either figured out that that is a decoy or is a very rude tern. We're gonna hope that it was the former. All right, so now that we've got them coming in, who exactly are we expecting to show up on these islands? So as I'm sure you could guess from the last slide, we do get a lot of terns. So we get 3 different species of terns commonly out there. One of them is the common tern. We get about 10,750 pairs on 12 to 14 islands. We get Arctic terns. We get about 2,430 pairs on 5 to 8 islands. And then roseate terns, we get about 242 pairs on 3 to 5 islands. The terns are a really cool species for if you're just getting into bird identification, because they're pretty simple to tell apart. If you look at their beak color, you'll notice that the common tern all the way on the left there has the red tip at the end of the black tip at the end of the beak. And then our Arctic tern has the full red beak without that black tip. And then the roseate tern has the black bill. And then you can also tell the Arctic tern is a lot shorter than the common tern, which is another good way to help distinguish them where they have pretty similar beak colors. And these birds did historically nest on roughly 90 islands in the Gulf of Maine, which, as you can see, is way more than the rate that they're currently nesting. But we do have 98% of terns in Maine nest on only 10 managed colonies, and 80% of those are on only 6 islands. So that's a really small number of islands for them to be on. And the roseate terns, 93% of them nest on only 2 islands. So that's an even more concentrated uh, on just 2 islands that's not super spread out around in the Gulf of Maine. We also account for 96% of Arctic terns in the lower 48 states on our islands. So when we look at this, it should send up some alarm bells, because if we think about storms or any kind of major event that could happen on an island, if that storm hits the one of the 2 islands the roseate terns are on, then that could mean really bad things for them, because they're not nesting anywhere else. So it could be really devastating just having one severe storm. And then, of course, everyone's favorite, we also have the Atlantic puffin out on the islands. We have about 1,300 pairs on 4 to 5 islands. And then we also have the razorbills, have about 750 pairs on 6 islands. And then the black guillemot, we have about 12,000 adults on 166 islands. So the black guillemots definitely spread themselves out better than the rest of our friends here. But these guys do not make it easy to count them. They are super good at nesting underground and under large rocks, which, as you can imagine, if you're a researcher trying to count how many chicks are in a nest, makes it kind of difficult to figure it out when they're underground or under a boulder that you have to navigate around. Our islands, though, do support 85% of Atlantic puffins and razorbills in the US, which is huge, as the Gulf of Maine is the southern limit of their breeding range. Makes sense, but we're proud to have them here. And then this is a super cool fact that we just love to share whenever we get a chance. Matinicus Rock in 2018 had the first common mure chicks in Maine in over 130 years, which is amazing. We were so happy to see them. And this past season, we actually had 18 pairs nesting on Matinicus Rock, which is super amazing. It's always good when you see the work that you've been doing kind of paying off, and seeing these species come back is amazing. We're so happy. So we got the birds. They're there. We know who's there. What are our technicians doing with them? So one of the biggest things they do is productivity monitoring. They got to know how many eggs are there, how many of them hatched, how many of the birds end up fledging successfully and leaving the island at the end of the season. That's pretty much what our technicians are out there doing day to day, is getting up and checking the nests. And you can see on the right there, there's a little baby bird in that bag, and she's weighing it to make sure that he's eating and growing and hopefully gonna fully leave the nest and be a successful seabird all on his own. There's lots of cool things that they monitor while they're out there. Weight, of course, is just one of them, but they'll keep an eye on them right up until they're big enough to tag. And as soon as they can get a band on, they do it. And then we can track that bird as long as the band stays on them. And this is an internationally reported thing. If they turn up in South America and a researcher sees them, they're able to say, hey, I saw this number bird at this time at this location. And then we know that, we have that data. So super cool to think that they can show up anywhere and we can find out about it. One of the other super big things that the technicians are doing is keeping track of what mom and dad are bringing home for dinner. There are a lot of different options out there that the birds could bring back to their chicks. And of course, like any diet, there are things that are good for them and things that are not so good for them. So these pictures, we have some examples of some things that we like to see being brought in. So we like to see things like herring, hake, and sand lance. Those are all really good fish, have good nutrients. We like to see them being fed to the chicks. It helps them really grow up strong and healthy and be way more successful. So we like to see these things. And if you can imagine, the birds aren't exactly bringing the researchers their fish and saying, here, this is what I'm going to feed my kid. They're out there, like that picture in the bottom right, that the researchers are real time getting the binoculars out and trying to figure out, what does that guy have in his mouth? What is he bringing home? What is he going to feed his chick tonight? And I don't know about you, that is hard. Like, props to the people that can do that, because it is definitely something that takes a lot of practice and is super difficult. And then, of course, we have the other end of the spectrum, the things that we really don't want to see being brought back to colonies. That top left picture there is a butterfish. If you can imagine, all the fish we saw in the last picture were very long, narrow fish. We like those because that chick has to swallow that fish whole. They can't tear it or rip it apart at all. So it all has to go down all at once. And if you can imagine trying to swallow that butterfish, that little mouth is not going to do it. So we don't like to see those coming back, mostly just because they can't eat them. It's really not productive. You end up with chicks that can't eat anything, and they're starving with piles of food around them. So we don't like the butterfish. We don't want to see those in our colonies at all. And then right next to him there, of course, you see the moth there. That's also just not a good source of nutrients. It's not worth the parents' energy to catch it and bring it back. Same thing with the puffin down there. We really don't want to see these food options that are not going to be helping the chick long term get the nutrients it needs and be able to grow successfully. And unfortunately, these kinds of food issues do end up leading to the bottom corners. The guy on the left is in really rough shape, and he's probably heading towards the guy on the bottom right, who has unfortunately died. So we don't want to see our chicks dying out there, especially because they're not getting the right food. So then another big thing, this is the bummer section of the presentation. I promise it gets lighter, but this is a huge part of what they do too, is predator control. So we've got the great horned owl there, the great blackback gull, the peregrine falcon, and an otter. Everyone right now is probably looking at that gull thinking, yeah, they eat the chicks, which is a huge threat for sure, but also just as big of a threat is when one of these predators comes into a colony, the adult birds don't just leave. They will actually swarm the predator and just try and annoy it basically until it leaves. And that's great. If you have one or two predators a season come in and, mom and dad are protecting the baby, that's great. But when you have predators coming in over and over again, that's a lot of energy for those birds to be exerting. So we don't want them to be constantly stirred up by predators and constantly having to chase them off. So we do our best to keep an eye out for predators and make sure that they're removed from the islands and taken away where they can't bother the colonies anymore. Because we, again, just don't want them having to expend the energy to do it themselves. So we try and help them out there. All right, so what kind of research are we focused on at the Maine Coastal Islands? We really focus on two main areas. We focus on climate change and offshore wind development right now. And then, of course, the cumulative effects that both of these are going to have on the seabirds. So we're worried about increasing sea surface temperatures. You can imagine these birds spend a lot of time in the top of the water, and as temperatures increase, is it going to shift the range that they're at? Is it going to shift, where they want to nest? Are they going to abandon old nesting sites? Lots of different things that we kind of just have to wait and see how they respond at this point. Same thing with the changes in forest fish abundance and distribution. That is what we're thinking is going on with the butterfish. We're seeing more butterfish being brought in, thinking that it's a part of climate change as the fish move to seek colder waters. The previous fish that were available in the areas that our birds are used to fishing in are just not there anymore. So they're catching different fish as the fish move and change positions. And then the increased frequency of storms, like I said earlier, one bad storm on an island that houses, 50% of a species is potentially devastating for that species. So as we look at climate change driven increased frequency of storms, that's not good for us. We can handle, one or two really bad storms a season, but if it becomes, one or two bad storms a month, that's not good. So that's something we definitely are keeping an eye on and trying to track as best we can. Same with the offshore wind development. That's a pretty new field that we're getting into and trying to get ahead of the curve so that we're not realizing down the road that, oh, wait, all of these negative effects are happening. We're looking at things like collision, displacement, and barrier effects. Are the birds actually at risk of physically running into these wind turbines? Are they used to fishing in these areas? What kind of effect are these towers going to have on the birds out there? And then, of course, the effects of all of these things compounded on one another, and how is that going to influence them and change their lives? So here's a really good example. If you're not super familiar with sea surface temperature in the Gulf of Maine, this chart is from 2002. And as you can see, the darker blue colors signify the colder temperatures, while as it moves towards darker red, it's warmer colors. And that map's pretty good, look, lots of blue on there, so pretty cold environment. And then we skip ahead to this past summer, and there's no blue on there anymore. We are much warmer than we were, 20 years ago. So how is this going to impact birds? Are they going to be abandoning nesting sites? Are they going to be moving fully into Canada? What are we going to see long term as we look at these temperature trends? But of course, it's not always as simple as are puffins doing good or not. You can see this graph is all over the place since 2004. Year by year, there's just major differences. You never really know how it's going to go. This past year was pretty bad. Next year could be amazing. It's one of those things that we just kind of have to keep watching and keep doing all the little things that we know work to help them, and hope that it's enough to keep them moving in the right direction. And then same thing, I got the Arctic tern productivity rates from Petit Manan. This is a bit longer, goes back to 84. And you can see they are trending down, which of course is not something that we want to see, but it's a lot of up and down, lots of spikes. So it's, again, something we have to just keep plugging away at and kind of hoping for the best. All right, so we know how they're doing fledging from the islands. What happens when they leave the islands? This is one way that we keep track of that. If you look really close, you can see the radio transmitter on our common terns back there. We use these to keep track of where they go when they leave our islands. This is really great because we can do things like identify foraging areas. So if a tern is going back to the same place over and over again out in the ocean, we can reasonably assume that he's probably picking up good food there. So that might be a significant place that we want to focus conservation attention. We can also keep track of colony attendance patterns. How often is this tern coming back? Is it coming back to the same islands? All these kinds of things. We also can identify migratory pathways and staging areas similar to the foraging areas. If a tern is using the a similar flight path every single year, then it might be worth saying, hey, we got to clear some space for them to be moving through these areas. So here's basically that in an image here. We got our Arctic terns migration route. Arctic terns are incredible. They have the longest migration route of any living animal. They are super, super talented flyers. As you can see, that green line there, they start, up in the Gulf of Maine, make it all the way down to the Antarctic, spend the winter season feeding down there where that red line is, and then that yellow line, they make their spring migration back up to nest on the islands again. So super long trip for them. I cannot imagine doing that much physical labor. Uh, just an incredible species for sure. So that's where the Arctic terns go, but what about common terns? Where are they ending up? So basically, they're going to the northern end of South America. Female terns, which you can see in that yellow line there, they tend to depart Cape Cod around August, and they fly to Venezuela in about 6 days. But the male terns, which you can see in the red lines, they tend to stay until mid-September. They take a little bit longer hanging out up here. But then they do make their way down there. The birds traveled an average of 4,432 kilometers on their fall migration. Again, crazy distances that these birds are going every single year. So once they get down to South America, they all kind of hang out in different places. You can see the different colors represent different terns. So you can see the blue dots. That guy really got around. He went way down all the way into Argentina. And then the red and the purple guys really pretty much hung out in the same area. So good for us to know. And it's a little bit difficult to see, but if you look really closely, there is some blue underneath all that purple and red there. So our guy in blue did hang out in that area for a long time. And what this shows us is that that area is really ecologically significant to these terns. They're spending a lot of time there. A lot of them are hanging out there. So it's good for us to know that, this is an area we need to look at protecting and making sure that these birds are safe while they're there. And then here's again some radio transmitter data. This is a common tern on Seal Island. The three different colors are three different birds. And what we're looking at here is where the birds are going when they're leaving the island to forage food. So as you can see, kind of in that strait between the islands, there's tons and tons of dots there. That means that that bird spent a lot of time there. So that area, again, is one where we got to be paying attention because the terns are spending a lot of time there. So that area is somewhere that it might make sense to pursue some stricter conservation methods so that we can help support them and make sure that they can still find the fish that they need. And then we can also see, we had a couple stragglers that kind of went out to sea a little bit for food, which is also good to know that, it's not uncommon for them to take a quick hike out to sea and see what they can find. And then this guy, again, similar, but this is with a Leach's storm petrel. One of them was tagged on Petit Island. That's the green dots you can see going out. And then the other ones are from Petit Manan. This is super cool to see because they're going really far out there. They're making it all the way out to George's Bank trying to get food, which is incredible for us to see and know that, they're making these long voyages and just to find food. So then again, got a petrel from Matinic. And as you can see where the red square and triangle are, that's the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. And the petrel flew right through that area. So it's always good for us to see data like this, that they're using that space. That space is significant to them. And it's one more reason that we can say, hey, it's a good thing that that area is protected because it's a safe place for this petrel to just sit and kind of hang out if he needs a break while he's going way, way out there. All right, so that's pretty much it from me. So looking forward to you guys' questions, but super quickly, I just want to thank the Friends of Maine, Coastal Islands. They're our friends group. They are super instrumental in supporting everything that gets done in this refuge. They make sure that the technicians are able to come every year and be paid for the work that they're doing, that they can get the equipment that they need. They're super helpful in staffing the visitor center, making sure that people are there to greet guests and let them know that they're welcome and that their questions are important and we want to share all the good work we do, while also letting the guys that do all the biology and everything, letting them do their work and not have to come down every single time someone comes in. So yeah, super, super cool, super big thank you to them. If you guys want to keep up with us, I put all our socials up there. Feel free, follow us. Our website's down there as well. You can sign up to join our mailing list and keep up with what we're doing. And also, if you're not super into asking a question right now, feel free to email me, or if we don't have time to cover your question, definitely email me. I'd be more than happy to chat with anyone and everyone. And yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome. Tori, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. I learned so much things. I was sitting here typing a whole bunch of questions. So I would love to open it up for anyone who would like. You can unmute yourself and just say me over here, raise your hand. I can try and call on you so we don't have too many people over chatting. So is there anyone out there that has any questions for Tori? All right, I do have some in here that I will ask. So we had someone ask, do you know how they put the radio transmitters on some of the birds that you were talking about?
Yeah, that is a great question, and not actually one I know the answer to. Unfortunately, this is my first season with Maine Coastal Islands, so I am so looking forward to getting out onto the islands myself this summer, but I have not had the chance to yet. So definitely, if you want to shoot me an email, I can totally get back to you on that. Yeah, sorry I don't have the answer right away, but I would be more than happy to look it up and learn about that.
Wonderful. We had another question from Sue Merrow here that I might be actually able to answer too. She asked in one of the earlier slides, it was mentioned the term recruitment from one of the species, and she asked, what does that mean? And so recruitment there, Sue, is the amount of how much the species continues to climb in numbers. So you have a pair and then they have a chick, that is a recruitment number. So they're, providing an additional numbers to those species. Does that work, Tori, as a
Yes.
kind of a definition?
Perfect.
Awesome. Oops, what is recruitment in your work? What does recruitment in your work? I'm not entirely sure what you mean, Sue. So sorry. I'm gonna let you maybe try something else and oh, is that you there, Sue?
Yeah, I just was trying to fix a typo in you did answer my question. I was just trying to fix a typo in my previous chat message. So
Got it.
I'm all set.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue.
And it looks like we had Amanda McFarlane is here. She said she's a former tech from the island, and she said they use leg loop harnesses like a backpack that are placed by hand after being trapped for the transmitters. So that's awesome. We had someone with real experience here to share with us how they do it.
I love that. I'm also so fascinated on what the process that must look like. Amanda going out and trying to capture some of those birds who I'm sure are very loud and very feisty, and grabbing a hold of them to put a little backpack on them. I know for some bird research, you're able to like set up the nets that they can't see in the smaller ones, and you can kind of come and like hold the cute little like songbirds. But I'm sure for these a little bit larger birds, things are a little bit more intense.
Yeah, they actually are able to put like wire traps out on some of the tern nests. So they'll go in and they'll take out the eggs from the nest and keep them in a safe place. And they put some wooden eggs back in. And then when mom comes back to sit on the eggs, they close the little trap door and they're able to do all the weighing if they need to band her, everything. They're able to do that without harming the eggs when mom kind of freaks out that people are coming at her. And then they let mom go and they put the eggs back in, and mom is none the wiser, and they have some good data.
That's awesome. I do have one in here, a question that I would really love to maybe dig into a little bit. Jeff asks, Why do the birds require so much management?
Yeah, so they actually have a really interesting history in the Gulf of Maine. They historically had been here for a really long time, and then when people kind of started going out to the islands and making it a point to live there long term, there was some hunting for feathers. If you're familiar with the old pictures of ladies' hats that had really big feathers on them, they were under pressure from that. Puffins were also hunted for meat. So they really just faced a lot of hunting pressures. And then, of course, changing habitat and changing in who was allowed on the islands as far as different bird species. The lighthouse keepers were not a fan of gulls, so they chased away a lot of gulls for a long time, which of course limited predation on the colonies, so helped them thrive for a little bit, and hunting pressures and came back in and kind of depleted them. So we actually didn't have puffins in Maine for a long time, and it took human effort and human interference and putting out those decoys and rebuilding these colonies to get the puffins back into Maine. So it's a continuation of a long, long process of driving the seabirds out and now trying to bring them back in. So we're just kind of continuing along with this work and hoping that we're headed in a good direction.
And I suppose to continue with that, is without the without human interaction, they may not have needed so much monitoring
Exactly.
and intervention. And then with such loss and maybe habitat that they can expand to, or food source or everything else, we kind of have to, it's this difference between like conservation and preservation. Where do we need to really like be an active role until maybe they're healthy enough to do it on their own, or whatever it is. Also, birds, I feel like, especially seabirds, are a really good indicator of biodiversity and a healthy ecosystem. If you have a larger number of these bird species, everything is wiser and healthier as well. We're getting some really great questions in here. I do have one. Jillian asks here, question from her 7-year-old daughter. Thank you for listening, 7-year-old daughter. And how can the birds fly such a far distance?
That is a great question. I wonder that myself all the time because it is crazy how far they go. At the end of the day, they are built for it. It is totally what they are engineered to do. And they are seabirds, so they don't mind, taking a break out at sea and just floating for a little bit. That's totally their element. So they are totally comfortable flying over water for long periods because that's what they've been bred to do for generations and generations.
Absolutely. And they are made really light. Their bones are very thin and have this really cool structure that make them, if you take a bird and you like hold it, it feels like they're very, very light. They feel like they would look really heavy, but they're not. And also they're very good at capturing winds and following winds, and getting, instead of flying the entire time, sometimes they can just catch the wind and they can drift for really long periods of time. That's how they kind of estimate how our stellar sea eagle friend flew so far all the way to Maine. Is it got caught by a storm or something and got blown all the way this way, and it's wonderful.
Yep, and we have data on terns on their way to South America being caught in hurricanes and blown
Wow,
off course by it, and we can see them correcting and coming back online.
that is crazy. Awesome. Continuing with our amazing questions, Robert asks, in some of your research that you were talking about where it was climate change and then impacts of wind development, how do you assess bird mortality with the windmills, since those birds would just fall, theoretically fall directly into the sea?
Yeah, that definitely is one of the challenges of it. It's not something that's easy to do by any means. That is really where the radio data comes in, where we're tracking where they're going and the areas that they're in. So if we notice, a windmill went up in an area that a lot of birds typically fly through, we're able to kind of keep an eye on it closer and monitor a little bit of are we still seeing birds go through there, and are they making it through successfully? Because
Yeah. It's definitely a very interesting, they're meant to be out there where there's lots of wind and not a lot of people, and that makes, assessing anything very difficult.
yeah, for sure.
Awesome. I'm just scrolling through my
Hey, Patrick, I had a question.
Yep.
I was just wondering if the United States ever works with, in regards to the terns going to South America, if we ever kind of partner with these other countries, because, obviously the habitat there is just as important as the habitat here for these birds to survive. So I was just wondering if there was any collaboration there.
Right, yeah. I don't know so much on the federal government level as far as that kind of collaboration, but
Sure,
there's definitely collaboration with other researchers, especially where they have those bands that have their specific identity numbers on them.
Right.
We get birds on our island that were tagged down there, and so we, ping them and say, hey, we have one of your birds here, and they kind of do the same thing for us. So it definitely is something where we kind of work in concert, but we kind of, I think, they handle their area and we kind of handle our area. So we share data, but not so much the specific management of different areas.
Right. Cool. Thanks.
That's a great question. I had a very similar question in my notes too, is do you have an organization that contributes more data, or is one that you might hear from more often that's oh, we saw this one today, or we saw this one that continually, is a really great partner to all of this?
Not off the top of my head. It's more just whoever is seeing them and reporting it.
Do you have any individual birders that would, because I imagine some of these species are, fairly rare, and, with photographers or birders, we know that they're people who love birds, right? Yeah. And, they have their lists and they collect, that stuff. And I wonder if you ever get anything that's I found, unfortunately, this, dead bird today with this tag on it, or I photographed this bird, do you get any of that community science?
Yeah, that honestly is one of the most amazing parts of having bird bands. The birding community does know what they are, and they are pretty adept at spotting them and being able to pull the numbers from them. So definitely with any species, not just our seabirds, the community science is there, and people are really fairly easily able to punch in and say, hey, I found this bird dead, or this bird was in my backyard today. I saw it and I read the tag and it is this species, so I know I have the right bird.
That's wonderful. I have another question. I have two other good questions we're going to get here. Amanda asks, has working with the public on seabird research, so doing this outreach, increased interest? Have you noticed an uptick in public interest with Maine Coastal Islands Wildlife Refuge?
Yeah, so like I said, I just started this past September, and I personally was never a really, really big birder. They were kind of cool. I liked them, but I wasn't super invested in the bird community. And just by nature of getting to know this organization and the work that they do, I am just blown away, and I find myself way more interested in all birds, not just seabirds. And I think that's the case for anyone that comes in. We get people in the visitor center that just saw it, thought it'd be cool. They want to come in and see what we're talking about. And people do really leave feeling like, oh, this is cool. Like, I am interested, sign me up for the mailing list long term. I want to hear about these birds and how they're doing. And I think it's once we get over the gap of connecting with people, people are so interested. I mean, how can you look at these cute little baby puffins and not just be blown away by how amazing they are?
100%. That's the fun thing about outdoor education. You put a fun, cute thing next to it, and people will always flock to it and flock to it. And it's maybe one small bird isn't super exciting all the time, but when you add the multitudes of birds as an actual flock, I think that really like fascinates a lot of people, which is wonderful. We have another one from Robert. What percentage of banded birds do not return each year? And I have a follow-up question with this one afterwards as well.
That is a great question. I have no clue, honestly. That is something that I would have to go back and dig into for sure, because yeah, it's a great question, but I do not know, unfortunately.
To piggyback on that one, do you see the same pairs, or not necessarily pairs, do you see the same individuals of banded birds come back to the same island every year? Kind of like the same fish going to the same stream every year, or these migration routes? Or is it just any random bird flying over, seeing the island, oh, that's where I'm going to go? Or is it like I was born there? Or sea turtles is the example I was thinking of. They come back to the same beach every single year, to lay their eggs that they grew up and hatched from. Do we see that with the birds here in Maine?
Yeah, so definitely there is an aspect of, I see it, it looks good, I want to be there. That's why we've got the decoys out there trying to draw them in. But there definitely are birds that come back year after year after year. We have a couple different technicians that have spent multiple seasons in a row on the same island, and they will tell you that they remember the birds and the birds remember them, because they see them all the time over and over again. And it is cool to recite a bird that you tagged the season before. They definitely come back. They had a bird on one of the islands that took up shop right above their outhouse and would scream at them and poop on them anytime they had to go to the bathroom. So they were very familiar with that bird, and unfortunately for them, he did return the following season to continue terrorizing their bathroom visits.
That's wonderful story. I just feel like now, learning all this stuff, I feel like we have, you see in these nature documentaries all the time, the researchers who sit in remote islands doing, this work, who get pestered by, albatross or penguins or all these things. And we have something very similar happening here on the coast of Maine, which is quite fantastic. I do have one last question with a couple minutes left here. She says, Nancy asked, part of the wildlife refuge is a few ledges off Marshall Point. What are the rules for human interaction with the birds on these ledges?
Yeah, so it's complicated just because, when they're on our land, we really don't want them to be disturbed. It can be pretty detrimental to them, especially, if we've had a lot of fog come in and it's really wet on the islands. If they're getting up and moving a lot, it can saturate chicks' wings and just make it really hard for them to be successful. So we don't like to have a lot of disturbances. So the islands are closed to the public while the birds are there for the duration of the nesting season, which is always a bummer for everybody that wants to see them. Great way to see them is to get on a boat and keep a respectful distance, but they'll come out and you can see them pretty close. But yeah, we do just ask that if you are seeing them out and about, that just be respectful. Don't bother them. They're doing their thing, and just do your thing and let them be.
Do you have it? Do you know of any like federal protections or state protections for any of these birds? You know, similar to like the plover, that's very endangered, and
Right.
you know, lots of no dogs can be on the beaches when they're nesting. Any of these things for any of these birds that you've been talking about tonight?
Yeah, the islands are closed, so that's the biggest thing. We don't, because when they're nesting, we really don't want them to be bothered. So they do close the islands. And as far as like endangered protections, we're really excited that they're coming back to Maine because we haven't had them around for a long time, but they're not really endangered on like a global scale. They've been nesting in other places, just not in the Gulf of Maine. So there's not really a lot of like federal protection for them, just in that sense of them being endangered. The roseate tern is on the endangered list, but it's a species of least concern. So it's not one of the ones that's garnering a lot of attention and really specific protection.
Wonderful. Well, with that, everyone, I just want to wrap up. So thank you everyone so much for coming tonight. And thank you, Tori, for your presentation. I hope everyone had a wonderful time spending their Tuesday night with us. We hope that you learned something and you can share something with any of your family or friends, anything like that. Right now, or before we get to the super end, we have our next event for our Learn, Discover, Grow series is on Tuesday, March 29th at 7 p.m. This event will be the guest speaker, Eva Matthews Lark. She's the senior manager of the public programs for the Seabird Institute in Hog Island, Auburn camp. She's going to be talking to us a little bit more specifically about puffins, which is really exciting because that's puffing viewing season is right around the corner, which is really exciting. And we love coastal birds and seabirds, shorebirds. It's really quite exciting. So join us then. The registration link will be coming out shortly, and check our websites and sign up for some of our mailing lists as well. We also just put into the chat. Actually, I think, Sally, that may have been a direct message to me instead of to everyone. Sorry. We're going to be putting in the chat again our donation list, our link. There it is. Thank you so much, the wizard in the back. If you enjoyed the program tonight, please consider donating to Herringut Learning Center or the Friends of Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge. We all do amazing work, if we do say so ourselves, and we put on these events for you all. So we also support. I love that support. So thank you all so much. We hope you have a great evening. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. And thank you, Tori. A little bit of round of applause. And we all hope that you have an amazing, amazing night. Hopefully we'll see you next month. Bye, everyone.